Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode from the Lessons from the Playroom podcast. And I have with me another very special person in my life. For many, many reasons, this individual is incredibly special and meaningful to me. One is I've known her since the beginning of my journey when I first started to talk about synergetic play therapy. She and I have also co-taught before. She has been one of my main consultants in our programming for many, many years. And she's also one of my supervisor trainers. So she plays many roles in my life. She's also a friend of mine. So I want to introduce you to Mili Shoemaker. If you don't know Milli, and Millie and I are going to have a conversation. I'm actually going to let Millie introduce what we're going to talk about, because Millie is the one that was sort of nudging me to do a podcast on what we are going to talk about. So Millie, I'm just going to let you say hi and jump in here, and we can start talking.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. I am Milli. I am so excited. We are having this conversation. I think all of you are going to love it. Um, yes, I know that. So, should I say the title of our conversation?
Whatever, yeah, where you want to go, yeah.
Okay. So, we're going to talk about attachment to self. Yes.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. Go on, keep going,
Okay.
Millie.
So, and kind of like the idea of this conversation is I'm going to ask a lot of questions to Lisa Dion. So then those that are curious about attachment to self, they get to hear from her. Okay. It's going to be a conversation, but I already have so many questions in my mind for
Yeah.
Lisa. Okay.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Millie, do you want to start with why you wanted us to have this conversation, or
Yes.
how this has impacted you, this topic?
Yes. So let me just to the audience, let me give you some context of this concept, right? Like back in 2010, when I did my first training with Lisa, Lisa was already teaching SPT, even though it wasn't called SPT then, but she was teaching for at least what, 3 years? Like when did you
More
start?
than that. Yeah, more than that. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
like I don't know when was the. Anyway, I was very lucky that Lisa used to live near where I am in Colorado, and she was teaching an intensive, a 6 day training in play therapy. And one of the first concepts that I learned with her was attachment to self. I was very new as a therapist. I wasn't even, I in Argentina, I studied social work, and I wasn't even a therapist. So for me, when Lisa presented that concept, it made totally sense, right? And then I went to school and I heard a lot of the theories around attachment, the attachment theory, which is not necessarily not that it's not necessarily what we're going to talk about, because it is about attachment, but Lisa is going to show you a different angle of this idea of attachment. So for 15 years, I've been a therapist, and this has been the core of my work, attachment to self, not only as a therapist, but also as a mother. And I also supervise a lot of therapists, and I realized that many therapists don't know much of this concept. So I've been texting Lisa, the world needs to know about this. You need to tell them, because you've been teaching about attachment to self for many, many years, at least for 20 years. So Lisa, what is attachment to self? Tell us.
Yeah. In one sentence, what is attachment to self? So let's talk about this from a couple of different angles. And I'll provide some context. I love what you just said, that we are talking about attachment, but I'm going to talk about it from maybe a slightly different angle than how people tend to think about attachment. So let's even just start there. When we think about attachment, we tend to think about a process that happens between two people. Usually we think about it in terms of a caregiver and their child. And we think about it from the perspective of what does the child need to do or not do in order to get their needs met from their caregiver. And in doing so, we developed these styles of attaching, these styles of connecting or not attaching or not, not connecting. And so the world of attachment has really looked at it as this process, right, that happens between two people. And in a lot of attachment conversation, there's also a lot of emphasis on what the adult or the caregiver does or doesn't do that influences that. So we're sort of set the stage. I think that's like familiar, for everyone. And what I'm about to say does not deny any of that. It is a yes and, right? So this conversation is the and part of this conversation. Where I started to get curious about this, Millie, was way back in, like 1999. And at the time, I was immersing myself in various contemplative practices. And in these contemplative practices, one of the things that we would look at is the nature of the mind, right? Like the mind itself. What does the mind do? What's the what is the mind? And one of the things that became very interesting to me was the understanding that really the mind has more than one capacity, but its primary capacity to understand the world is projection. And that really, when we understand the nature of the mind, we recognize, well, actually kind of puts into question, is there an other outside of what we think is out there? I know I'm starting getting weird in my language here, but this is really what we started to get curious about with the mind. For example, Millie, I'm for those of you that are audio listening right now, I'm holding what many would call a pen up. But if I said, Millie, where is this pen? Well, Millie, your instinct might be, well, Lisa, it's in your hand. You're holding it. Or if I said to you, Millie, where am I relative to you right now? You'd be like, Lisa, you're across the screen. I'm staring at you. But we need to back that up and actually break that down and recognize that the way that our mind works is that as you are looking at me, Millie, or as we're both looking at this pen, what we're really bringing in is sensory information, right? So there is information. It's not that something doesn't exist. You do exist, Millie. I do exist, right? There's this thing we call a pen does exist, right? But as we take in information about other, it's filtered through what I like to call our historical filing cabinet. And so when we ask the question, where is the pen? What's actually a more accurate statement, the answer would be, it's in my mind. Because there is something there, but I can't experience it without it being filtered through my own inner experiences, my own past conditioning, my own history. And so I pull all that together, and up pops in my mind this construct that then I go, well, it's a pen and it's over there. Or you're doing that with me, Millie, and you're like, well, you're Lisa over there. And so it's a weird thing to think about if we haven't thought about the mind in this way. But to put it very simply, we actually can't experience something outside of ourselves unless it is through ourself, right? And so when we experience something, we're really experiencing it within our own mind. I'm going to pause here, Millie, to see if you have any questions before I keep going with this.
Something that is coming up for me, I am following you and I'm so enjoying this conversation, but so for those that don't know what a pen is, so right, like you and I, you assume that we and the audience know what the pen is, right? But what I think there is a previous step, which it is, what is a pen, right? Like what is a person? Like if let's say maybe a community that hasn't been in civilization comes into contact with you and I, they're gonna think like, they cannot make sense of us because they don't have these preconceived concepts of what someone like us look like, feel like, and all of that.
Exactly.
You agree on that?
Yeah, beautiful. Because it adds to the point that I'm trying to make, that I'm only referencing it as a pen. Or if I show that to you and I said, Millie, what do I call this? And you said pen, because of your prior conditioning around it. But if I took this thing that we're labeling as pen, and you're right, I took it and I handed it to a little kid who has grown up in a village somewhere, who's never seen a pen, they might use it as a utensil to eat. They might use it, they might figure out that it makes a mark, and they might use it to paint their face, or they might use it as something else that has nothing to do with a pen. So I think that is another layer of understanding about the nature of the mind, is that when we experience things, our conditioning then is what allows us to label the thing. So it's almost like we experience something and then we make it concrete. We label it, we define it, we say what it is because of our history and our conditioning and prior experiences with it, all of that. But it's still in my mind, right? My experience of it is still within my own mind. So the listeners might be going, okay, that's nice, Lisa, but what does this have to do with attachment? Well, in this place of curiosity, of really looking at the nature of my own mind and really recognizing that, you know, I was experiencing the world through my own internal constructs, it put a question in my mind. And the question was this: what am I actually attaching to in relationship? That's the question. That was the question, right? Am I actually attaching to another person? Or am I attaching to my perception of another person? And that started to form in my mind about 20 years ago. And the more I looked at that, the more I began to appreciate that actually, yes, other influences perception. So as I'm saying this, listeners, really important, I'm just going to say this again. If an infant is not being fed, right? If an infant or a child is being interacted with in a way where it doesn't feel safe, does that influence the child's perception? 100%. But the question we need to ask is, what exactly are they attaching or not attaching to? Is it actually to the adult, or is it to their perception of the adult? I'm going to keep breaking this down, Millie, but I think there's another piece here that I think if I can overlay will help make this make sense. We know from the attachment world now that you can have a different attachment style with every single person in your family. Well, now that's interesting. 20 years ago, that field would not have said that. They would have said you have one single attachment style. But we now know at any given point, you can have multiple attachment styles. Well, that's fascinating. We also know that your attachment style can change with the same person. Well, now that's also super interesting, right? We also know from lots of research that you can have children that grow up in a seemingly very similar environment, similar care, but they walk away with very different attachment styles. So it sort of makes you step back and go, okay, well, what's the variable? Because clearly attachment style isn't static as we once thought that it was. So what's the variable? So Millie, when we take that and we overlay what we just said, what we can recognize is the variable is perception, right? My perception of different individuals impacts my attachment style. My perception can also change over time with an individual, which affects my attachment style. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People in a singular family don't experience their caregivers in the exact same way. So that's different attachment styles. I'm on a roll. Can I just keep going, Millie?
Yes. I just want to ask you a question before you move on.
Yes.
Many of us that we've been with you and work with you for so long, we know what you mean when you speak about perception. not everyone knows what perception really means, or we can interpret it in different ways. Can you just speak a little bit about like what are you referring to when you say perception?
Yeah, beautiful. Way to ask just a really simple question there, Millie.
We need another episode.
So we know that all parts of us sense, right? Feel, sense. Perception is part of that. So some of us are familiar, for example, with Stephen Porges introduced this idea of neuroception of safety. Well, what he's really referring to there is that there are certain things that we perceive, right? We pick up on the environment, certain sort of clues and cues that let us know, are we safe in this moment or not? So really it's about sensing, feeling. I think the most fascinating part of that is to really to recognize that all parts of us sense and feel and perceive down even into the cellular level. So like, for example, if you were to take a cell and you were to introduce a toxin next to a cell, you would actually see the cell wall that was closest to the toxin. You would actually see the cell wall shift and move and build up, almost like building a barricade close to where that toxin is. So we can actually step back and go, well, how cool is that? A cell somehow feels or senses or perceives, that's where we're going to throw that word in here, that there is something that is potentially dangerous in the environment, and therefore it moves to build and strengthen for protection. So our cells do this, and then you think of how many cells do we have in our body, right, that are doing this. Our mind is doing this as we are filtering sensory data as we move through the world. Some listeners, if this is not the first time you've listened to an episode with me, probably familiar with how I talk about the 4 perceived challenges that our mind is scanning for in the environment to determine whether they're safety. So there's a lot of sort of feeling, sensing, filtering that's going on through our mind and our body that is providing information to help us ultimately survive, really what it, boils down to it. So we will keep perception at that in our definition, right?
For now.
For now. Yeah, exactly. For now.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I want to link this over because it's about attachment to self, right? So what does that mean? Well, we've established so far a place of curiosity around what are we actually attaching to, right? If this sort of other is actually an experience we have within, so we'll kind of hold that. This idea that even in current conversation about attachment, that you can have different attachment styles. Well, what's the variable? Well, there's something about perception where I want to link this. And to me, I'm already even having goosebumps as we're about to talk about this, is that what has landed for me and makes a lot of sense for me. And I see this with kids, and I see this with therapists, and is that really the attachment style has more to do with the self than with another human being. So when I am perceiving what I'm perceiving, do I stay connected to myself or not? Right? When I am perceiving what I'm perceiving with my caregiver, with my partner, with my kid, with whoever it is that I would theoretically have an attachment style to, it's an interesting sort of flip to go, maybe the attachment style is about what happens relationally within me while I have the perception of the other person. I'm going to say that again. I'm sure there's some people that listen to that and we're like, wait, what? Rewind. Back up. What did you just say? What happens inside of myself, how I disconnect from myself. Do I go into an anxious type of relationship with myself? Do I shut down with myself? Do I get disorganized within myself? Or am I able to stay connected to myself and have a moment of what we would then call a secure attachment style or a secure attachment moment as I am in perception of other? Okay, so I'm going to pause there and see where you want to go with that, Millie.
So many questions in my mind. One is, can you be attached to yourself 24/7?
No,
Mm.
no. We go in and out of, that'd be like saying, does somebody have a secure attachment 24 hours a day? No. Um, think of it like this. As I move through the world, I am perceiving, I'm experiencing, I'm filtering. I am designed to hyper focus on challenges in my environment, external environment, internal environment. As I focus on those, I am also designed to take those challenges on and do something about those, right? I'm designed to I'm designed to take care of myself, right? In the introduction to synergetic play therapy course, this is sort of, we go deeper then and connect this with nervous system states and how attachment style and nervous system states connect and all of that and all of that. I'm not going to go into that in this conversation, because the piece that I want to focus on is that when we are able to have a moment of attachment to ourself, which I like to think of it as coming home, right? It's a moment where I am aware of myself. It's a moment when I'm able to feel what I'm feeling, but not get swept up in what I'm feeling. Millie, you know that this is where I also talk about regulation in a way that's a little different than how regulation is talked about. Regulation is, for me, is really about a moment of mindful awareness, a moment of mindful connection, which allows me then to understand what might be useful for my body to modulate whatever it is I'm experiencing in that moment. And as I just described this in regulation, that's attached to self. It's also a moment of having a secure attachment. You know, every moment that I become aware, every moment I engage in reflective awareness and I become aware, oh, my heart's racing, oh, I feel jittery, I feel scared, I feel nervous, I want to withdraw, I want to go hide. I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do. I'm confused, I'm overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, my tummy's in the knot. Ugh, I feel like I'm gonna vomit, right? All these moments of mindful awareness. The simple act that I'm becoming aware is a moment where I am tuning inward and I am coming home. So I'm moving from, I disconnected from myself, right? I detached from myself. We could say I'm moving from an anxious attachment moment, or moving from an avoidant attachment moment, or I'm moving from an disorganized attachment moment into a moment of secure attachment. And what I love about that is secure attachment from this perspective also doesn't mean that I can't also be having other types of activation in my body. I think sometimes when people talk about secure attachment, they think of it as, oh, I'm happy. Like I'm just so happy and I'm calm and there's not a problem. No. Secure attachment to self within is about my own ability to connect to myself in the midst of whatever challenge is going on. And I know that I don't want to say that. I am able to be with myself. I don't need to run away from it. I don't need to shut it down. I don't need to avoid it. In SPT, we talk about this as like having one foot in the activation in me and one foot in my ventral state where I'm able to attach to self. These are significant moments. SPT, we go so far to say that attachment to self is the cornerstone of all healing. Millie, if I asked you to name a trauma protocol that did not require you to have moments of mindful awareness for integration, you'd have a hard time thinking of one.
Yeah.
So right? It's these moments of being able to be attached to ourselves, these moments of being able to sense that there is an okayness in the midst of all of the turmoil, the ability to have a bit of an observer online while we are processing something. I mean, these are significant moments for integration. And just to keep tying this all together, 19 years ago, when I was in this sort of really contemplative place of looking at the nature of the mind, it really helped me understand that the work ultimately isn't about changing the other person, that the work is actually about redoing the relational ruptures that happen from within. So let me put this in context. Absolutely, right? We're born into this world. We have different experiences. The people in our life influence these different experiences. And from those, we learn to detach from ourselves or to develop higher abilities to attach from ourselves, right? We detach because it doesn't feel safe. We attach because there's moments where it can feel safe. We could go into a whole other question about what is the self. I mean, that's a whole other
Yes.
piece.
And before
That's a
you
whole
keep
other piece.
going,
Yeah.
will you say that we are born with this ability to attach to ourselves, or is that something that we develop over time? Like, how do we, like, you are 40 something, I am 40 something. So we are in our place of our lives that we know what this feels like in our bodies. But take me back to when we were born, right? Like,
Well, I
what
think we need
is
to go
this?
before we were
Okay.
born.
Well, before, don't take me there. Even if we talk about transgenerational trauma, right? And
Exactly.
transgenerational information, right? But
Exactly.
where would you say that the
Which
self,
Millie
yeah,
influences perception at the cellular level, even
yes,
when you're in utero. Sorry, I just have to say that out loud.
yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Right?
Where
Wakes up
would you
getting
say,
eggs.
I agree. I agree
Yeah.
with you, Lisa. At which point do we become aware, right, that we have that in us?
Yeah. I think it's a complex question because the answer is I don't know.
Mm.
I think that at some point we are designed to catch a glimpse of ourselves. The way that it seems that it works is we catch a glimpse of ourselves through other, right? So we need the mirror, right? We need to filter ourselves through other initially as we begin to develop an internal sense of self. So, they
So in
talk.
this, tell us the role of the parents, because many
Yeah,
times people think that parents, when they hear this, is that they're not needed as much. What is the role? Like,
yeah,
if a parent, right, let's say, is listening to this conversation, what is the role and the influence, impacts that the parent can have to
yeah.
the kid?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously there's the basic needs and all of that, but if we're from this particular topic, it is to help the child catch a glimpse of themselves, right? To help the child recognize that there is an internal self to attach to. That's what I think one of the most significant roles a parent plays. It's huge, right?
It's,
that's a whole
oh,
other topic,
you
right?
know what is coming up from me, like as a parent, right? Like all the shoots that, like, so many times as parents, which I know we're opening like a worm, kind of worms, right? But as parents, we have so many shoots, so many ideas around how we should be as parents, that many times we miss who we have in front of us, like who is that self in front of us. So yeah, I don't know what's my question with this. It's
Yeah.
just a sensation that I'm having in my body when we're talking
Yeah.
about this around.
Well, I do think that's its own separate podcast of like how can a parent promote this or develop this in a child. But I think that what's important to name is that there are many influences on a child's perception that would then support the child in learning internal attachment patterns that they then continue to myelinate over and over and over again, that from an observer would then call them, oh, that's your attachment style. Again, the reframe here is, yes, it's an attachment style, but it's less about attaching to another person and more about what's happening relationally inside of the individual as they are they're holding the perception of another individual. So complex, but
So
yes,
complex.
so complex, but important, right? Important conversation. But I think it's important that we recognize that there are many, many influences. So a caregiver, for example, might be doing just an extraordinary job at helping the child catch a glimpse of themselves. But you know what? The child had some medical trauma, and it's really painful for that 6-month-old to feel their own body because of the residue of the trauma from the medical trauma. And it doesn't matter how well that parent is supporting the reflection in that way. The child's own internal struggle to attach to themselves is very real. Or maybe there's a shock that happens in life, right? And the shock creates a disruption, or there's a loss, or there's there's so many other reasons. Millie, I feel like I've got to say this on behalf of all parents, because I've been to a lot of trauma conferences, and I've been to a lot of trauma conferences that focus on attachment. And I tell you, sometimes I walk out of those conferences and I feel like it was, multiple days of people just taking a baseball bat at parents. Really, I don't know how else to say that, right? Like parent fault, parent fault, parent fault, parent fault. And it's like, whoa, hold on a second. Like, let's not fault anybody in this equation. We're all on a journey to learn how to attach to self. Millie, let's put this in context. If I'm a parent and I don't know how to attach to myself, how am I going to mirror that capacity to my child? No, actually, what I'm going to mirror to them is my attachment style, meaning what happens within me when I'm in challenge or when I'm in my perception of challenge. And my child's going to learn that coping strategy. So let's even put that layer on it. What if we looked at attachment style as coping strategy, right?
Or even protective, right?
Protective,
Because it's about
protective internal
safety.
coping strategy. Exactly. What happens within me? So to answer your question, I don't know at what age kids catch a glimpse. I've met kids who catch a glimpse way earlier than I think the literature would say is possible. And then I also have worked with clients who walked into my office and they have no idea that there's a self, and they haven't caught a glimpse yet. And that's my starting point, is to begin to help them begin to catch a glimpse, so that we can redo their internal attachment style from within, right? So that we can help them develop that internal attachment style, so that then as they go through the world and they're perceiving challenges, et cetera, that they know how to connect, right? They know how to regulate, to modulate, to come home time and time and time and time and time again, which I really truly believe is the cornerstone of all healing. And I believe it is one of the most extraordinary internal processes that we all have the ability to redo at any point in our lives. Any point in our lives. Ooh, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And Millie, you and I see this with SPT therapists. It's one of my favorite things about watching therapists on the SPT journey is when they first start the program, and then by the time they end in certification, there is a shift in their attachment style. There just is. And for therapists that have been at it, for years and years and years and years and years, there just is. There's an internal shift in their own felt sense of feeling securely attached to themselves, as they move through the world. And then the extension of that is then they are able to then be securely attached themselves in relationship with others. And so that secure attachment is then extended outward into that relationship. Does that make sense as I'm saying that, Millie?
It does to me, but I'm an SPTer, so I'm really curious to see how this is landing,
Yeah.
to other other therapies that are not SPTers.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is coming up for me is that, I think of all of us have or experience trauma, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, when we experience trauma, we lose ourselves because in the moment is so much what is happening. So this sense of unsafety, this sense, the four threats to the brain, right, are so online that you need to live yourself in order to survive, in order to survive.
Exactly.
That's it. So what I'm like kind of like connecting is like when we are experiencing trauma, we are surviving. If we don't integrate that trauma, we continue to survive. When we are able to come back to ourselves and attach to ourselves, we are living life,
And it's the moment, yeah, we're living life, and it's the moment of integration. It's those
moment of integration,
integration points.
right?
Exactly.
Like in that moment, I feel safe. In that, like what I really want the audience to hear is that attachment to self is not only for those that haven't had traumas, right? Like that are free of traumas,
Yeah.
which I haven't met a human
I
being,
haven't met anybody yet, but
right?
okay. Let's,
But
well,
like
we'll keep it
attachment,
open as a possibility.
so that attachment to self is and can be the result of a trauma that you experience that you're able to integrate.
Oh, let's even name that. A fully integrated trauma.
Yeah.
In the moment of integration, that is one of the signs that a trauma has integrated. That is one of the signs. I can think about it and not lose myself.
Yes.
I can recall the experience of it and I don't get swept up in the activation of it, where now all of a sudden I am detaching and I'm moving into one of those attachment styles within myself. That I can be with myself as I recall my own life experience, right? I can be with the sensations in my body as I relive, recall the experiences of my life. Um, I think we could argue that when we're at that point, it is now integrated into our narrative, our personal narrative in a way where we now have created new meaning. A lot of trauma work now is talking about resiliency coming out of trauma. Well, I would link those here too, that you're not going to get resiliency or new meaning that then influences, creates strength within the system and then influences things moving forward. You're not going to get that without this secure attachment moment from within. And what I'm saying is we actually can have many of these moments where our system becomes well versed in having secure attached moments with ourselves. We can get to the place where we do rupture repair within ourselves well. But no, we're not going to live in a state of secure attachment because we're moving through the world, and because we're designed to look for challenge. Well, that's being filtered through my history, and I don't have everything in my history integrated. Nobody does. And so great, next moment of activation, next moment of attachment style emerging, next opportunity to redo that. And so we go here on this amazing journey of like recollecting ourselves, right? Recollecting parts of ourselves and integrating perception over and over and over and over and over again.
I don't know if this is too much to ask because I don't know if we have time, but you're such a good storyteller. Do you have a story of yourself that puts all of these together? Like all of these concepts? Because when you tell a story, you give us an image and we can connect with that and take it home. So, do
Yeah,
you have a story for us?
I can actually give you one directly related to the playroom and how attachment to self has influenced me personally in the playroom.
Yes.
So growing up, one of the feelings that emerged in my home was a feeling of unpredictability, like a feeling of uncertainty, like something's going on and I don't quite know what it is, right? Like that was a feeling in my home. And as a result of that, when that feeling of, we'll call it hypervigilance, let's say, would come in, I would notice that in those moments, I would then move into sort of an anxious attachment style with myself, right? I could overlay that on one of my caregivers,
I was
also
gonna ask
in
you,
relationship.
who of your
Right?
parents?
Yes, exactly. I could
Yeah.
overlay that there, and someone would look at our interaction and go, wow, you have an anxious attachment style. I love you, mom, with your mom, right? That's what they would say. But actually, it wasn't with my mom. It was around my perception of my mom is when my system would move into a more anxious type of a response, and I would detach from myself. Okay, well, I'm a human being. Fast forward, that's in my history. I'm in a play therapy session, right? Early on. And I noticed that I had a lot of trauma cases very early on in my work. Well, hypervigilance is a very common feeling that emerges when we're working with high levels of trauma. And what I began to notice is when that feeling would emerge in the room, I would disconnect from myself and my own internal attachment style would kick in those moments, right? I think that's also, Millie, maybe we can highlight, it obviously wasn't about my mom because it was still being reenacted and my mom wasn't even in the room in front of me. But the felt sense was still there. Does that make sense? And so I'm responding to the felt sense and the perception. I think
And
I'm
then
sure.
you regress, right?
And then,
Like,
right, yes, exactly. So what I found was that as I learned to become aware of myself in those moments, and as I began to learn this journey of attaching to myself in this process, that when that feeling comes up in the playroom, I don't have the same attachment style anymore. I can feel it if it's not like my body doesn't get activated, but I don't detach. I can stay connected. I can have a secure attachment with myself within the feeling of hypervigilance and something's going on. I'm not sure what's going on. That's huge as a clinician.
and I
You know,
wonder how that impact your client, you
well,
being able to,
exactly. And my ability to hold that in a new way or different way for my client, right? And then we can we can connect that over. And then as a parent, my ability then to, when that comes into my life, and then my daughter is observing my attachment style in hypervigilance, and she then gets to see me work with my own internal state when that feeling comes up, and now I'm getting to model that for her. And because I'm modeling that for her, well, then she gets to notice what's happening inside of her because she doesn't have to take care of me. And she doesn't have to avoid what's going on for her because I'm able to hold what's happening. Right. And she gets to start to get curious about, oh, what happens in my body, around this. And she then starts to catch a glimpse, right, into her own relationship with those kinds of states. But that's the piece that I see so happen so often with SPT therapists, is that's that internal attachments. It just changes. It changes and it changes and it changes and it changes and it changes.
and I wonder, since this, since your journey of, right, coming back to you, attaching to yourself, I wonder that if there was a change in your relationship with your mom, when your mom
Yes. Oh, thank you.
gave
Let me
up.
bring that all together. Yes,
I have your,
okay,
I don't know
okay.
why your mom is in my heart today, and
Yes.
I wanted to
Yes.
ask about her, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yes, beautiful. Yes, so thank you. So, so in 1999, oh my gosh, how old was I? Late 1999. I was in my early 20s, right? In 1999. And this is where I started to understand the nature of my own mind. And this is where I got to be curious about my mother
Mm.
and my relationship with my mother. And when I started to learn this piece, right, and observe this piece within me, and then doing the work, okay, my mom didn't change,
Mm.
but my perception of my perception of Well, it is. My perception, my mother actually did change.
Your
Because
mom didn't change.
my mom
Your
didn't change.
perception
My
changed.
perception changed. And
Therefore, she probably changed a little bit too. To some
well,
degree.
I think people would then look at our relationship over time, and I would have been one of those where they said, wow, she's got a different attachment style with the same person at two different points in their life. Did she change? Not really. Did my internal relationship with myself as I'm relating to my mom change? 100%. 100%.
Oh,
So there we go, Millie. There's your talk on attachment to self.
there you go, audience. I think this is such a gift to, to those that listen to your podcast and those that want to learn more about it. Of course, go and do the intro. But I really believe that this is something that the whole world needs to hear about. Like things will be so differently if everyone knew about this concept. I think of schools, I think how we relate to kids in general, like as an adult, right? Like, I don't know, I feel that, yeah, world, wake up, listen to Lisa.
Well, why don't we leave listeners with a homework assignment?
Yes.
Point of curiosity. This next week, I want you to observe when you detach from yourself. What are those perceptions that you're having? And then also, are there moments when you remember what's going on for you? You sense what's happening and see if you can orient into what's that feeling of coming back and attaching to yourself. So it's literally just a place of curiosity. Where do you detach? What's going on in those moments when you detach from yourself? Can you remember? Can you sense what's going on inside of you in those moments? And can you then invite yourself back? And just play around with that and just observe. That's it. That's the homework assignment. Yes. Awesome.
So if the audience wants to learn more about attachment to self, where do they
yeah. Come
Yeah.
take the Intro to SPT training.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's we
There
get
is more, right? There is more that
there's a lot more. Like I said, we overlay this with how this works in the autonomic nervous system and what this feels and looks like from that perspective. So yes, there's definitely more to unpack in this conversation for sure. Well, Millie, thank you for being an important person in my world. Appreciate you so much. Listeners, thank you also for being important individuals in my world. This conversation wouldn't be happening today if you did not exist, everyone. So thank you for providing a reason and inspiration for us to even take the time to get together to have this conversation. You know what I'm going to say next, everyone, which is wherever you are in the world, take care of yourself, which essentially what I'm saying is attached to yourself is really what I'm saying. And you're important. You are the most important toy in the playroom. Until next time, everyone. See you later.